Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
There is this cast of characters who's continuously recycled because we have this, this branch of government that no one voted for. You can't vote these people in. You can't vote them out. You kind of know who they are. You kind of don't. And it is this kind of hall of mirrors. And that's becoming like an increasingly undeniable feature of the world that we live in.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, our weekly publishers and editors podcast here at The American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of The American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. And the gang's all here. I am joined today by managing editor Seth Barron, editor James Poulos, and publisher and president Ryan Williams. Well, we almost went for 4 weeks in a row talking about Trump indictments. The regime establishment has certainly given us no shortage of opportunities to do Trump indictment segments. But this week, with a new indictment coming in from a Georgia grand jury, we actually thought we would put a pin in it and wait to talk more fully about this indictment and all of Trump's many legal troubles, some might say persecutions, during a special 1-hour episode next week with our guest, John Yoo. He's a law professor at the University of California at Berkeley School of Law. He's also a frequent contributor to the Claremont Review of Books and general all-around friend of Claremont. John will join us to talk through the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts of all these different accusations and charges. The top line of this Georgia thing is that this is a state case brought by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. It implicates not just Trump, but our friend and associate John Eastman, plus Jenna Ellis, Rudy Giuliani, a whole bunch of names that you will recognize, Sidney Powell. And the accusations include that all of these people engaged in various related criminal activities, including but not limited to false statements and writings, impersonating a public officer, forgery, filing false documents, influencing witnesses, computer theft, computer trespass, computer invasion of privacy, conspiracy to defraud the state, acts involving theft, and perjury. So most of our time next week, the whole hour will just be spent enumerating the things of which Trump and his associates are now accused. But we will also get a full rundown from Professor Yoo as well, which means we're leaving that on the table for now, and we're going to move on to talk about some of the other things that are going on, starting with these fires in Maui, in Hawaii. As of these recordings, we're looking at over 100 people dead, it seems. Wildfires raging across Maui, really tragic and horrifying imagery and statistics coming out. And of course, an accompanying brouhaha, Rorschach test of interpretations and accusations based on who is watching and who ought to be doing what or saying what where. So, if you're somebody who is inclined to attribute all natural and indeed political disasters to climate change and or Republicans' inaction in its face, then this is just another object lesson in how a vote for Republicans is a vote for Armageddon and apocalypse. If you're a Biden critic, then there's plenty of hypocrisy on offer to note in the fact that Republican presidents tend to be hammered during natural disasters like this for not showing up, not doing enough, not expressing enough empathy, not acting as the nation's caregiver, figurehead, and so forth. Biden is definitely not pouring forth his tears of lamentation or getting photo ops with the bereaved families. And if that's something you think a president should be doing, then you might make that accusation against him. If, on the other hand, you're of a conspiratorial cast of mind, which is not, on this podcast at least, a disparagement, you might be raising questions about whether there are kind of whether the fires themselves have some kind of sinister motivation behind them, some human cause, and whether there's a plan in place, either intentionally or just serendipitously, a plan in place to use these as an opportunity to hoover up a bunch of land, to create the first 15-minute city, which is one of these, enviro climate fascism buzzwords where they keep everybody basically under permanent lockdown. I'm going to open it up to the crew and just see what people think. Obviously, a horrible tragedy. Is it also a scheme on the part of BlackRock and or the World Economic Forum to begin our transition into climate lockdown?
Never let an opportunity go to waste, right? Isn't that what we learned from the last lockdown? It seems unlikely to me that anybody was actually setting fires or planning it, but once it happens, there's no reason not to jump in. So I wouldn't be surprised if people have all kinds of plans. I mean, my one take on this whole thing is everybody was saying that Joe Biden was showing, even the left media was saying that he was showing a lack of compassion when he just said no comment when asked about the fires. But I think that's showing a lack of compassion toward Joe Biden. Nobody had told him what to say. So, he was kind of stuck. What do you expect? Even though this is kind of just boilerplate for a president, oh, it's terrible. We're going to rush my people to the scene. We're going to offer, FEMA will be there, and we're going to have all kinds of money and counselors on tap.
It's not that hard. I mean, you could be a speechwriter for this. It's not that hard.
I mean, I think anybody could come up with what he should have said.
Right.
But this man can't handle anything off the cuff, except jokes about ice cream or being Joe Biden's husband or his son and stuff like that. So I think we need to step back and consider who the real victim in all of this is: President Biden.
It was rather inconsiderate of the fires not to wait until such time as he could be briefed.
Exactly.
And told what to say.
Yeah, on stuff like this, and I'll apologize ahead of time for my lackluster audio here. I'm on site at the John Marshall Fellowship, so I forgot the good mic back at the office. So forgive me, everyone. This kind of thing, Hanlon's razor. This it's not really a philosophical razor, but it's a saying: never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. I think there are many versions of stupidity, incompetence, lack of energy that you can attribute to various government agencies and their related entities. And so, I mean, the state of Hawaii and its municipal services have never been at the top of people's lists of well-run and competent organizations. So, it's this bad combination of high winds. It looks from, just from reporting, high winds coupled with a fire department that did not attend a fire long enough and did not fully put it out enough. And 70-mile-an-hour winds with embers, and you have a recipe for disaster, even in a very humid climate like Hawaii. I mean, anyone who's been there, the thought of a fast-moving wildfire, the likes of which we're used to in California, seems odd. But you get things hot enough and put wind with it, and it'll cut through even a half-soaked place. It's all very sad. I've been amused by the many conspiracy theories floating around, including that you'll conspicuously absent from destroyed property is Oprah's property on Hawaii, and she avoided the mudslides in Mendocino back in the day as well. Or Mendocino, Montecito, sorry, the one near Santa Barbara.
You just
Beautiful
have to do
place.
what I do, Ryan, and grow up on the outskirts of Oprah's Montecito property near her service entrance, and then you'll be protected in the kind of aura.
That's right. You have a some sort of sixth generation protector around you that is only available to billionaires. No,
it's only visible actually when I meet people, they can see the orb around me. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, no, it's not a plot by BlackRock. I mean, as Seth said, what the big organizations and individuals who look for opportunities like this, even out of disaster, to scoop up properties on the cheap and quickly, that's just that's just what smart people with a lot of cash laying around do. And now the question of whether that's a good matter of public policy for Hawaii should be up to the people of Hawaii and their representatives. So they will have various remedies, I think, probably after the fact, even with them taking account of property rights such as they are. So, I mean, all you can feel is just sympathy and at this tragedy where, and you read, it's the type of story you can't read to your wife when you have small children because they think a lot of the deceased are kids who were stuck in the house when their parents were away and didn't have adequate warning. And it's just horrible.
Well, I agree with all that as far as it goes. And it certainly is horrible. I guess I'm going to have a slightly different take today on all this. There is, I guess it's not apocryphal, but there is a sort of a tale that gets told sometimes in our circles about the late great Justice Antonin Scalia, who evidently advanced the argument in private or semi-private that really a table was just whatever we said was a table, and there was kind of no escape from this. And this is summoned forth sometimes as evidence that Scalia was really a textualist, and he was not an originalist, and he did not care about original intent, and at the end of the day was willing to kind of recede into a kind of linguistic relativism that stops him short from being one of the true greats. Why do I mention all this? Well, there's another kind of paradox in philosophical circles concerning tables, that they love to use tables as an example of things, and the case here is, how many holes can there be in a table before it ceases to be a table? We are being forced, I think, by events and by the bizarre way in which events like this fire are covered or not covered by the regime and its media organs. That leaves one with, I think, the distinct impression that at this point there are more rabbit holes than there is like rabbit table, if I can say that. There are too many of them popping up everywhere, and certainly no one has time to go down all of them, or would even want to go down all of them, but they're multiplying. And it is easy to say, oh, this is all conspiratorialism. Oh, don't waste your time on it. And who has time for it anyway? But it does appear to be the case that after 22 years spent in Las Vegas, the incident commander during the infamously unsolved Vegas shooting, there was a guy, it was pinned on, whatever, but all these questions, lingering questions, inconsistencies, various strangeness. He left Vegas after 22 years, came to Hawaii, and he's now Maui police chief. And he's the guy who's going out there and telling CNN and others, things like, well, there's a reason why only 2 bodies out of 68 dead on Maui have been identified. Why is it this guy? Why is he there? It's becoming a constant in our society that, in the same way that in the old days, you'd hear an advertisement on the radio for a certain kind of breakfast cereal, and then you get in your car and you'd see a billboard for the breakfast cereal, and then your neighbor would talk about the breakfast cereal, and then you're thinking about the breakfast cereal, and then you buy it, and then you eat it, and like that's sort of what drives the economy. We're heading into a world where like these repetitions, these figures keep resurfacing, these kind of incidents keep happening. There's this nagging feeling that these things are somehow interconnected, and there is this cast of characters who's continuously recycled because we have this this branch of government that no one voted for. You can't vote these people in, you can't vote them out. You kind of know who they are, you kind of don't. And it is this kind of hall of mirrors. And that's becoming like an increasingly undeniable feature of the world that we live in. It's haunting the Biden family. It's haunting the lawfare that is being practiced against, people in the Trump orbit. It is bizarre, and it is unceasing, and it seems set to continue indefinitely. And I think, this is getting under the skin of many Americans. I think that, you can invoke Hanlon's razor, and it sounds very reasonable. And as far as it goes, it is reasonable. Like, yes, surely there's a lot of incompetence, and just because you encounter incompetence or evidence or the repercussions of incompetence doesn't mean that someone's behind the scenes rubbing their hands together, just salivating over the harm that they're going to bring to someone or some group of people. That's true, but malice isn't the only kind of evil. out there, and evil tends to be present at all levels of society, from the smallest village full of serfs who will forever remain obscure to the highest levels of power. And to deny that, or to try to wave away the problem of evil in public and private life by reducing it to malice, and then from there it's a very short step to say, like, well, surely everything isn't the product of malice, it's just various incompetence. Like, this seems to me to be a sort of self-induced kind of, I don't know, willful ignorance, or a sort of autistic denial of the reality of spiritual malevolence in our lives. And I just have this persistent feeling these days that finding reasonable ways of steering our perception and awareness and attention away from that kind of distributed malevolence is going to lead to just more pain. Pain that has origins which can't be explained by mere incompetence, and pain which has spiritual consequences, which cannot be, I think, processed in a kind of rationalistic way. I think we're probably going to talk about a certain song that is becoming culturally relevant very quickly, and I think its relevance, without being too sort of foreshadowing, has to do with the spiritual experience of more and more Americans under these conditions, where the official story just doesn't satisfy, and the recurring presence of these figures and events has a spiritual undercurrent to it that can't be explained by the official narratives or by the conspiracy narratives.
It's funny, James. As you were talking, I was thinking, there is an interesting connection here between these sets of considerations and the Oliver Anthony song and the discourse, capital D, that has risen up around it. Because in a second, we are, as you indicated, going to talk about Oliver Anthony's song "Richmond, North of Richmond," which is, I don't know, I think it's fair to call it a hillbilly lament that contains this hook, this continuous refrain: the rich men north of Richmond want to know what you think, want to know what you do. And kind of brooding over the song, and this has been part of both the positive and the negative commentary on it, brooding over the song is this sense of kind of anonymous, shadowy, cowled figures who run a system that is rigged. And the singer, the speaker of this text, is the person that's getting beat down by that. And from that perspective is like where the kind of song derives all its emotional impact. And yeah, I mean, it's been clear to us for a long time, I think, on this podcast, that conspiracy theories may get certain facts, in fact, may get all the facts wrong, while still being a kind of true artistic expression of the structure of life, that people are basically reaching out for a story that makes sense of, or at least expresses the fact that they feel like many important decisions about their lives are being made by people who don't care about them and who have become unaccountable to them and inaccessible to them. I mean, conspiracy theories are almost like the art form of the lost republic or the lost democracy. It's like what happens when representative government becomes a facade. Well, you are kind of maddened by your feeling that there's all this crucial, critical information that's outside of your grasp by design. And if it were the case that there were like an evil pedophile ring, or if it were the case that people were setting fires in Maui, would they tell you? Never mind whether it is or not. It's the sense that crazier things are certainly happening that you're not being told about. And so why not this too? And all of this puts me in mind, bear with me, of the desecration of the Herms in Athens in 415 BC. Only on the Roundtable podcast will you go from Maui to Oliver Anthony to the desecration of the Herms. I raise it only because this is another one of these kind of mysterious, unexplained events. This act of vandalism that the Athenians wake to discover all of their statues to the god Hermes that consist of kind of a head with other body parts, including a phallus. They've all been kind of mutilated. And this is shortly before the disastrous Sicilian expedition leads to this enormous inquest and ultimately to the fingering of Alcibiades, who's one of the great kind of golden boys, but also a member of an elite that increasingly seems to both have lost control, lost competency, and to have seized a certain kind of power over events that regular people simply lack. And so this situation where you're behind a kind of veil of unknowing makes people crazy. And it's not totally off base, I think, to identify that feeling with a kind of spiritual suffering, with a kind of sinister force out there in the world. Socrates himself identifies philosophy with a daimon, with a supernatural entity, a figure that is more than human, and ideas as they work themselves out in people's minds take on a certain life of their own. So even if, as I probably believe, I think that these fires just happened, I don't think that they're a conspiracy, but I do think that the fact we're all wondering, are they going to use this to shut people down, to lock people up, is expressive of the fact that there is a spirit abroad in the land, which for many decades, if not longer, has been working against human freedom. And it occupies certain very powerful people as if it were a demon that possessed our civilization. And the as if you can strike or leave in as you please. That's the last thing I have to say about that. Okay, should we talk about Oliver Anthony? I guess we can roll right into it. This song I've already mentioned. It's called Richmond, North of Richmond. I first saw it on a Twitter video. I think a lot of people did. And it had this quality that it went so viral that even tweets about it were kind of guaranteed to go viral. Anthony himself had never been on Twitter and then showed up on Twitter and immediately rocketed to like upwards of 300,000 followers. The song I've already kind of indicated is like an outline of the soul of somebody that feels beaten down by the Richmond, North of Richmond. They want to know what you think. They want to know what you do. And they don't think you know, but I know that you do. It's kind of this, like, they're lying. They know they're lying. They know you know they're lying, and so forth. It's got a raspy homespun feel to it. The video is pretty spare. It's him with a guitar out in the woods and a dog. And he's, got this very minimalist setup. His vocals are purposefully, out of tune in places, and the rhythm is rough. The comparisons to like Woody Guthrie have abounded and that sort of thing. So if you've not seen it, you can find it anywhere on iTunes or Spotify. And he's got a bunch of other songs too, many of them in the same theme. He has expressed a political stance that is not really doesn't really belong to a party and is more kind of a general mistrust and disaffection with America generally. To me, the most intense and probably powerful line in the song is young men are putting themselves 6 feet in the ground because all this damn country does is keep kicking them down. So that's the vibe of the song. Now the commentary. You pays your money and he takes your choice. Either this is a beautiful pouring forth of the populist soul, or it is a plant that was specifically designed to kind of pacify the populist soul by giving it the illusion of a mouthpiece, or it was perfectly sincere and yet misguided. That was the kind of NRO take. Oliver Anthony's Fuzzy Lament is an article that made the rounds saying, well, there are no Richmond north of Richmond. There is not this kind of shadowy force keeping you down. There are all sorts of problems, but you can still rise up. So how come this song is going so viral? And that's not limited to the NRO take. Be that as it may, as of this recording, Oliver Anthony has the top 3 songs on the iTunes download chart and 5 of the top 10. I mean, this is like an astonishing level of cultural resonance, at least among a certain set that we also tend to frequent. So I want to know what you guys think. Plant, misguided lament, spot on expression of the Western soul. What?
Yeah. Okay. I'll bite. So the first thing this guy did on stage since he achieved virality, capital A, capital V, evidently with record labels watching and so forth, he pulled out the Bible, I believe, and he read Psalm 37 on stage. Psalm 37, 21, 22, I am now going to read on this very podcast. It's short, so don't worry. The wicked borroweth and payeth not again, but the righteous showeth mercy and giveth. For such as be blessed of him shall inherit the earth, and they that be cursed of him shall be cut off. Psalm 37 is ripe for repackaging as a kind of retributive anthem, in keeping with the song itself, that has made such an impact for what are probably obvious reasons to all the people who are listening to it and talking about it. But it struck me that the section of Psalm 37 that I did just read is retold by Christ himself in the parable of the talents. For those who do not know or do not remember, basically the teaching is this: the Lord of the manor gives talents, coins, to his servants. One gets, I think, 10, the other gets 5, and the other gets 1. And these are sort of distributed on the basis of the Lord of the Manor's judgment about who can do what with how much. So the servants go off, and the one with 10 invests it wisely, effectively, makes 10 back. The one with 5 does the same. The one who receives 1 is sort of worried about losing the talent that he was given, worries that the Lord of the Manor is going to be harsh and angry and will reprimand him or punish him if the talent is lost. So he buries it in the ground. Not long thereafter, Lord of the Manor returns and says, like, okay, what do you got? The one with 10 says, hey, I made 10 more, and the Lord is pleased. The one with 5, hey, I made 5 more, the Lord is pleased. The one who buried it in the ground says, well, I buried it in the ground. And the Lord is very displeased, and in fact is so displeased that servant is, cast to the outer darkness and so forth. For to whom much is given, they will receive much, and who has been given little will receive nothing, which is very striking. And it's striking not because of the wrath of God that I think is sort of looming in the background for many people who think about these things, but based on the idea that, like, look, no matter what it is that you have sort of been given spiritually, if you are not out there putting that spiritual wealth into circulation and growing it, then you are squandering it, and you are going to end up with less than what you started out with. And I think, this is a powerful message that ought to be kept in mind by those who are feeling so much resentment and anger and appetite for revenge, all of these things which from a merely political standpoint seem very well justified and fuel for a righteous fire of revolution or payback or what have you. That's easy to relate to. It's easy to sympathize with. It's obviously very powerfully resonant right now in America for reasons that we have just worked our way through since the beginning of this podcast. At the same time, no matter who takes the reins in this country, no matter whether we destroy whatever part of government has become corrupt and unconstitutional, or try to replace it with something else, sort of all these political philosophical debates about the regime and where we're going and in what way, all very important. But if that spiritual component is lost and the life-giving spirit drops out of the equation, then for all the songs and all the readings of Psalms and everything, and all of the upswell of cultural anger and fury and political machinations, I think it's all going to be quite fruitless unless we do remember that if we do not take whatever that we've been given in spiritual treasure and put it to good use, then we can't be surprised when we end up empty-handed, when all of our human affairs lead toward more barrenness and more ruin. So, obviously this guy's story is one to watch. fame can be, a very bitter example of how people with promise and talent can be sucked in and spit out, much the worse for wear. Hopefully, it'll be different in his case, but these are still very early days, despite how late it all seems. And with the Trump indictments, which we'll get to in due course, it's just becoming clearer and clearer, I think, to many people, even at this late hour, just how long this long train of abuses can go on before the fever breaks.
Whether it's the theories that he's a plant, or I also saw, there was some, these aggregative think pieces that aren't really think pieces that come out 2 days after the fact, often by the right or the left, but in this case by the left, where it's, that the content of it was something like, what's the country hill, what's the hillbilly anthem that is getting all the white supremacists excited. Musings about whether he was a plant, especially from maybe the alt or dissident right, or whatever you want to call it, on Twitter, saying, look at the timing suspicious. This guy with that helps people become popular instantly jumped on it. In fact, it looks like he promoted it originally, and that's why it went viral, and he's going to make money off of it. Why are you all such naive fools? Don't follow this. All levels of counter signaling. Someone looked into his public, his Spotify playlist, I think, and it included videos and or podcasts that were skeptical of 9/11's causes. All of this happens within a week, and you have that National Review article, and then a follow-up National Review article responding to some of the commentary that Spencer talked about, and it's a perfect. The whole thing over the last 6 days is a perfect encapsulation of why everyone is going insane, especially people who live like we do sometimes in this pretty fenced in world of the commentary at the intersection of politics and media. And so I just lay that all out there because it's interesting and something to guard against getting sucked up into every time it happens, because it can be exhausting, disorienting, and ultimately it's probably bad for your psychological health. So find ways to escape those sorts of loops. And then finally, I just, go on a little thought experiment with me. The National Review piece, the guy who wrote it, in his follow-up piece listed that he's a vet, that he's, knows working class conditions. He's certainly not a, some dork who grew up in privilege, mansplaining or, Con Inc. explaining to the listeners and lovers of the song that actually the policies that he's identifying didn't cause his misery. That's all lame, and I don't want to attribute too much of that lameness to the author. I think he was being honest, but it was dumb in the following sense. Imagine going back to the, halcyon days of evolved, socialist politics and culture war in the second or third iteration in the West in the 60s, or even before that. Can you imagine the left taking a Woody Guthrie song that's very popular, that was critical of the things that they stood against, and trying to dissect it from various angles because it didn't have the right policy recommendations, or it was quote unquote wrong in its diagnosis? I mean, this is a continuing problem for the right. The counter signaling is almost immediate, and it's not very reflective. It certainly doesn't reflect what many of us regard as the gravity of the crisis of the time. So we continue to have a real problem, whereas I think a lot of us have observed over recent decades, and then going way back, the left has much less of this problem. They're much better at culture war because, in a way, they're more preternaturally savvy about things that they can use to their advantage across the cultural political spectrum. And maybe that's painting with too broad a brush, but that's what struck me about it. I just had one tweet about the NR piece, basically just saying it's imprudent, given our current times, to kind of try to undermine or complicate the popularity and attraction of such a phenomenon as this, rather than to lean into it and use it. And I find it, I have a lot of trouble. We'll keep an eye on it, but I have a lot of trouble thinking that this is some kind of deep op run by who knows what. My favorite take I saw today, which was that, he's actually complaining about taxes when it's really, that's not the source of the problem, because one of the verses about taxing us something. And so it's actually been funded by the Koch brothers as a cultural product to advocate for tax cuts. Anyway, I find the whole thing from various angles is fascinating for the reasons I laid out. And I think it shows a piece of it that I just discussed shows a reason why we continue to lose.
Well, Ryan, I would say that who but someone funded by the CIA would argue that this is not a CIA plan. No, just kidding. Well, it's
good point, Seth.
Yes, of course. No, but it's interesting because the left has long had a slogan: "No enemies to the left," and the right has adopted the same slogan unintelligently: "No enemies to the left." So the right wing is always looking to cut off anyone to the right, anyone who seems like they're, pushing the Overton window, anyone who might be getting a little toasty or frosty on the edges, anyone who would, association with whom might exclude one from a cocktail party, they've got to go. So the right is always looking to the left to get its signaling, essentially. Like, okay, well, what's appropriate? What's not appropriate? Yes. Okay, we have the populist energy now, but let's not take it too far. It's so funny. Like this song, I'm not going to comment on its artistic merits. It seems fine.
Oh, you're no fun. Boo.
Well, it seems as good as anything, I guess. I thought it seemed some of the lines were pretty clever and it's tuneful. I think it's just funny because 30 years ago, like Michael Moore, Jim Hightower, Molly Ivins, all of the old populist progressive types would have been all over this song. And it occurred to me, if he had just had one line in there, like, "And you can love who you want to," or something like that, they would all be over this song. They would still love it. If it had one little line about kind of just indicating that love is love, or, I don't care what your pronouns are, something like that. And it would be a completely different phenomenon. James, I liked what you were saying about it. It was funny. You're thinking about the parable of the talents, because, I'm not a Christian, but I'm always interested in the way that the left uses Jesus and his sayings as a cudgel to the right. Like, well, if you were a true Christian, you would, do such and such. So I always like it when you hear this counter equitarian stuff. Well, what does it mean that to those who have little, like, they'll lose even what they have? Like, that doesn't sound very Christian. So I appreciate that. Let me just say my favorite quote from Jesus, one which seems to baffle a lot of Christians, is "Sell your cloak and buy a sword." That one just is like my favorite counter equitarian, or counter, whatever this image we have of Jesus, that the left has of Jesus, like essentially as a kindly Unitarian minister washing the feet of migrants and giving all of his stuff to the poor as his total message. I just like to see that kind of confused a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, not to bring peace but a sword. I think, Seth, you're onto something very profound here with like the ways in which the right takes its cues from the left. There's just so much here, and I really understand, and it's easy to sympathize with guys on the right who are like, the left march through the institutions and it's a dictatorship of the intellectuals, and we got to fight fire with fire, and we got to take the power back, and that's why we need our own rules for radicals, and we need our own march through the institutions, and we need our own dictatorship of the intellectuals. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute, intellectualism is not what's going to save us, and certainly not trying to ape or trying to catch up with or outdo the intellectualism of the left. And when you see these, these guys, well-meaning intellectuals on the right, no sooner does the last note of a song like this ring out, then is there some intellectual, well, actually, no, you need to understand that if you're smart enough to really assess the situation, then you can debunk all of these claims that this guy is just making as artistic, sounds right. But no, if you're just, you have to dip every piece of culture and art that comes out of anything other than the approved Disneyplex mainstream. You have to dip that thing into an intellectual acid bath and pull it out and see what lies beneath. And that's the truth. This is madness. Like, if you abandon the field of common sense and spiritual experience to the the deplorables, to the remnant of society that is being indeed stomped on until they just kill themselves, then all that you have left is sort of trailing after this left intellectual machine that is always going to be one step, quote unquote, ahead. Well, actually, no, you think that you guys are the intellectuals, but we're the real intellectuals. We have a body of intellectualism that is, that is beyond, light years beyond anything that you think is even real. I mean, it kills me to see like reasonable, well-meaning, educated, courageous intellectuals on the right who are like, critical theory is the enemy and critical thinking is the answer. We must stop teaching kids critical theory and must start teaching them critical thinking. And it's like, and yet, these critical thinkers are somehow willfully blind to the fact that maybe there is not as much difference between critical theory and critical thought as you think. And I just, I really think that there are a lot of folks who mean well and are tired of losing, but they think that if you're not being an intellectual, you are being anti-intellectual. And I think that that is a trap. And seeing so many smart people fall into that trap is is pushing me further away from the intellectuals, despite and maybe because of my own intellectualism, which is very hard. It's just a hard thing to shake when you've been raised in it, nourished by it, rewarded for it, paid to do it. I know it's a hard habit to break, and most people who do break it just turn into sort of crazy people saying whatever comes to mind, descending into pure emotion. So I get it. I get the problem, but I think it's still one we need to face up to.
Serendipitous timing being what it is, James. We are here at the John Marshall Fellowship, where we have a bunch of lawyers, mostly going to federal clerkships or in between them, for the most part, not exclusively. And we had a federal appellate judge here last night and the night before giving a couple of evening talks. He will remain nameless because these were off the record. But one of his main themes, at least amongst his fellow high-end lawyers and judges, is that brilliance is overrated and we place it much too high. And he preferred to talk about character and regarded it as the older virtue one looks for in people moving in politics and the jurisprudential realm. I thought that was interesting.
Brilliant.
Yes, smart. How smart. I mean, let's not forget that wisdom is a moral virtue. More to the same point. No, I mean, this is all super well said, and I have ranted about it already on Twitter. So I will maybe rant less about it now. I don't know, but I do think that what Seth says and what James has now elaborated on very eloquently is so important as a kind of strategical point. It's also, I think, crucial from just a humane, spiritual perspective when it comes to thinking specifically about art. I mean, we do this everywhere. We do these purity spirals everywhere on the right, and we're always, closing ranks in upon each other and snitting at each other when we ought to be presenting a united front. But in particular, when a song like this goes viral, it is amazing to me how much of the response has to do with coming up with reasons to ignore or discount the fact that people are connecting to this piece of music, to this work of art, to this painting, to this movie, whatever. Oh, it has swear words in it. Well, there's nudity and that's wrong, you know? And these sorts of comments are exactly the kinds of comments that reveal to me why the same people who pound their fists on the table and say we must take the culture back and we must reclaim civilization through our artistic products and by revitalizing the aesthetics on the right, these are the very same people who, by the way they talk, reveal a willfully obtuse relationship to poetry, art, and aesthetics. I mean, the quarrel between these two things, between like your poetry and your art, is ancient and will, I'm sure, continue. But one thing that you have to do if you want to recover a spiritual, aesthetic, emotional dimension to your morality and your outlook on the world is understand and respect art for what it is as art, and not consider it a kind of subordinate second arm to your philosophy. That the only way that an artist can really serve the good is if he's basically acting as the advertiser, the pamphleteer for your precious theory. Like, your theory may be very right, and yet it doesn't actually have the authority to say this song that is clearly tapping into some profound vein of emotion and manifesting some, you know, inward experience of the human soul, like this song is somehow like wrong or incorrect or doesn't count. And that's the kind of talk that makes it clear that you don't really respect artists for artists. You don't think of them as creators. You think of them as subordinates. You think of them as executors of your ideal state. And, you know, of course, this is exactly the role that Socrates, perhaps tongue-in-cheek, imagines for artists in the Callipolis. And there's a reason why it's impossible. It's impossible to enact, because what you're really dealing with is two different ways of looking at the world that can be compatible, like two lenses in a pair of glasses, but are never going to be like in this kind of master-servant relationship. And I have to say, it really goes up my spine when people say things like, this work of art says something that I disagree with, and this is a flaw in its artistic execution. No, it's not. It's a flaw in your artistic appreciation. And there is such a thing as taste that goes beyond whatever preconceived notions you have about the perfect political theory. All right, I did rant for a little while about that. I'm sorry. I think we were going to talk about Bidenomics. We may return to this because it will recur again and again, and we all have to recommend to you that you read the damn site. So, having mined two very rich veins of inquiry, let's turn now to AmericanMind.org and tell people what pieces they should read. My pick for this week is called Western Civilization Chinese Style. It's by David Goldman, who is a Washington Fellow of the Claremont Institute. So he's one of our guys. He's also deputy editor of Asia Times and senior writer for Law and Liberty. One of our, I think, most astute cultural and technological observers with a specialty in China. This is part of a series that we will now be developing on our kind of brewing but unrecognized conflict with China, the stuff that's going on behind the scenes that maybe think pieces tend to miss, and certainly the government seems to be sleeping on. And David, in this article, makes the, in some ways, simple but profound observation that for all the talk of IP theft and the different technologies that China is replicating in its own labs, and the spies it's sending over to try to figure out our secret designs and then steal them and take them home and make counterfeit knockoff copies, the real and far more important object of China's theft is the culture of creativity that fostered those inventions in the first place. And this flies in the face of a certain kind of received wisdom about China, which holds that it's a place of, authoritarian, immovable, lack of maneuverability, and where everybody just has to think the same way. And, David says there's some truth to some of this. Certainly their political system is less free according to all sorts of, significant metrics than ours. But within the cultural sphere, within the sphere of training in what used to be called the fine arts and the rigor of the trivium and the quadrivium, China really is making strides and really advancing far beyond what we have allowed ourselves to slip into. I mean, one of these like just devastating observations in this article says, he says, a glance at Peking University's philosophy syllabus should remove any doubt that China knows exactly what it is doing. China's top university offers 4 undergraduate courses on Kant, including a full semester on the critique of judgment. Harvard, by contrast, offers not one, just a survey of post-Kantian European philosophy. Neither did Columbia when I studied there half a century ago. As a freshman, I talked my way into a graduate course on Kant by a visiting German. What you are looking at here is a culture that does not share our convictions and moral assumptions, or the best that convictions and moral assumptions that America has typically stood for, but that sees that we have dropped the ball and fallen asleep and is running with it at full pace. And this is sobering. It's also, I think, corrective to a certain dismissive attitude that says, well, China can never possibly beat or outstrip America. They can never pose a real threat to us because we have the right ideas. Yes, they can. And no, we don't anymore. So go read Western Civilization, Chinese Style by David P. Goldman. Seth, what do you
got? A piece that went up Wednesday night by Emmett Hare, who's written a few items for the American Mind. It's called Pity the Poor Trans Man. Kind of a tongue-in-cheek take on the trans phenomenon as it pertains to trans men. Most of the fuss and all of the noise has been about trans women and their efforts to move into spaces reserved for biological women. Nobody seems that worked up about trans men. Whether they are in prisons or men's bathrooms or sports, they don't really pose a major threat. He makes the point that trans men are they're more just like desexed women than men, and they don't really pose a threat to anybody. And he makes an interesting point that there have been women who've tried to get into men's sports, and he goes through a few examples, and nobody's ever been outraged by it. In fact, even defenders of men's sports and fans, they like the idea. Okay, great. If you can get a woman who can kick the ball, get her, a place, get her on a football team. They tried to get the Pacers signed a woman to possibly to play basketball years ago. I mean, there have been instances, and it's not anything that anybody gets worried about. It's an interesting piece. Pity the poor trans man.
Yeah, this was something that Seth, you texted me about a while ago, and it's nice to see that argument developed at length. James, what do you
got? What I have is Joel Kotkin's Class, Nation, and the Future. Longtime readers of Joel will not be surprised to learn what this piece is about. And it kind of, I think is a good companion piece with a certain viral anthem that we have been talking about today. I'll just read a little bit from it and talk about it. He says, many view the rise of Tucker Carlson-style anti-corporate populism in the party not as a potential boon, but a curse that needs to be exercised. To a large extent, Trump finds his base among such voters, but the GOP needs to find a less toxic and more focused conservative advocating for grassroots capitalism and some degree of restraint in terms of China trade. As traditionalists, they can adopt Hamilton's approach on domestic economics, as well as Washington's cautions on military adventures. After all, it's middle and working class jobs being sacrificed in the name of free market principles, as well as the profits of Wall Street financiers. It's also their offspring, not the children of the oligarchy who die in endless foreign wars. Unquote. Now, we can and do debate about the virtues of Donald Trump and their limitations, shooting at a moving target oftentimes. So your mileage may vary on Kotkin's Trump views, but it does seem to be inescapable that that we live in a large republic. At least we started out as a large republic. We're still large. If we want to remain or restore a large republic, it's going to have to be a commercial republic. There doesn't seem to be any way around that. I think right through the founders up to present day, that remains the case and is probably some kind of permanent principle of politics. If we are going to have a commercial republic, we need Americans in general, to some degree, engaged in commercial activity. and if that commercial activity is largely mutated away from productive economic life that is spiritually and physically healthy for Americans. If you want to read more on those topics, you can read some other pieces we have, like the true negatives of body positivity and sex work in the language games we play. We're covering these fronts as well. The left is interested in creating busy work for Americans that is not particularly healthy for anyone. And so, I think when you look at the immiseration that is consuming so much of the heartland, you look at the way that so much of our economic life has been shifted into virtual spaces or into really just transparently unhealthy ways of life. That's going to make it difficult for America to continue on as a large republic, or to be restored as a large republic, because of that commercial aspect. So there are some class factors here that do seem to be inescapable. I know, among others, Sohrab Ahmari, who we've engaged with for a long time. Recently tweeted, he's ferociously conservative on social issues, but increasingly, willing to consider that the left is more right than not on these kind of economic matters. That's not a direction we're going to go in. I think Joel gives us a solid peek at where conservatives might want to look economically in order to preserve the commercial life that is necessary to a large republic. So, Class Nation in the Future, Joel Cock.
And last but not least, Ryan, what do you got?
Thanks, Spencer. Yeah, I have Debunking Jack Smith's latest indictment against President Trump by Paul and Olivia Ingracia. Paul and Olivia, both former fellows of the Claremont Institute, and it actually is freshly relevant in light of this indictment out of Fulton County, Georgia, as well. And those who are familiar, at least with Paul Ingracia online on Twitter, especially, I mean, Paul is he's a thoughtful guy, but he's a bit of a hyper Trump pro Trump partisan on Twitter, and I don't mean that to say anything against Paul at all. I will have that caveat and just say the piece is pretty careful and goes through just the many ways in which this, to put it very mildly in my own words, the many ways in which at both the local and macro level the 2020 election was eyebrow raising. And he and his sister, Paul and Olivia, use it to basically raise, to try to undermine the premise of both, I think, Jack Smith's indictment in DC. I know we're going to talk indictments next week, but also the Fulton County DA's indictment that just dropped a couple of days ago. The premise of both, I think, that is both the indictments, is that only someone who's either stupid, and none of these people were because they're lawyers, etc., or someone who's evil and corrupt, i.e., that's what they were, would have any reason to question the 2020 election. And Paul and Olivia just sort of lay out the case, especially in Georgia and then elsewhere, for why that sort of view of 2020 is actually irrational and, in a way, sort of unpolitically scientific. That it makes eminent sense that people still, that both public opinion and even a lot of smart people who aren't just mindless partisans have worries about that election and worries about elections going forward. And they conclude with a point that we've made before without going into any great details or judgment one way or the other about riggedness or stolenness or anything. Just you have this fact in American national life these days that a good portion of the public regards elections as corrupt and problematic, and that's not good.
Yeah, it's fun to remember every now and then that all of these indictments are like three different layers of rhetorical construction deep. So even if you think that Trump is ultimately wrong, that the election was stolen, you may nevertheless find it perfectly reasonable to raise these sorts of questions. And this is one of those articles that shows all the ways in which there's plenty of stuff to dig into and to wonder about. And you would not have to be a hand-rubbing conspiratorial insurrectionist to ask these sorts of questions. So it's sort of preposterous to base an indictment on the assumption that in order to raise those questions at all, you would have to be trying to defraud the public. that is all the time we have for this week. In my personal opinion, this was one of my favorite episodes of the show. I hope you enjoyed it out there as well. If you want to know more about all the stuff we do, you can go to AmericanMind.org, which is the site we've just been imploring you to read. You can also go to ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com. We've got a new issue of CRB just about to hit the presses. I also think that this is one of our best ones. I don't always say that, although obviously I think all of the issues are good. I think this one is particularly packed with interesting stuff, including a great review by Mike Anton of Patrick Deneen, including essays by both Bill Vogley and Chris Caldwell on the supposed end of affirmative action, including a piece by yours truly on wave particle duality. There's all sorts of good stuff in there. ClaremontReviewBooks.com. And you can go to Claremont.org/donate to support everything we do. We really deeply appreciate those donations, and you can help us that way as well. One more way that you can help support us is to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, to subscribe wherever you're currently listening, and to spread the word by tweeting about us, telling your friends, talking on the group chat about the stuff you heard here. We really appreciate all of that, and it's because of you and thanks to you that we do everything we do. Thanks to our production crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri, and thanks to you all for listening. We will talk to you next week. Want to know what you think, want to know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do. Wish I could just wake up and have it not be true, but it is. Overtime hours, bullshit pay. That's see, right. Ryan was right.
Work all day.
Rich man north of Richmond. Just one. Yeah.
If you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for your bags of fudge rounds.
Thank you. That is the one lyric. I guess I could have just looked it up.